Hey everybody, this is Mr. Moffin coming at you with another APUSH video. This is our third video focusing in on topic 6.4, the New South. Previously we talked about how despite the South is going to start to make some changes economically in terms of modernizing, there's still going to be, unfortunately, tremendous lack of real change in terms of matters of race, socially and politically in the South. And we talked previously about the emergence of Jim Crow laws and all of the legal ways now that states are going to be able to basically effectively keep black Americans from participating politically despite the existence of the 14th and 15th Amendments. Now, in this new Jim Crow, segregated by law reality in the South, where violence against blacks is going to be socially accepted, where lack of opportunity for black Americans will be a reality. And it's also going to be important to keep in mind that the government at this point in time is going to show very little to no interest in trying to address the needs of black Americans in the South. You're not going to be seeing any more, by the time we get to the end of the 1800s, any more real concern by Congress about trying to protect black Americans. The White House really isn't interested in it. The Supreme Court certainly isn't interested in it. So if you are an African American living in this time period, you know that you don't really have a friend in the federal government. And so the question really is, if government isn't going to be there to protect you, to help you, then who's going to help you? And the answer to that is that if government won't help you, you have to help yourself. And so you're going to be seeing black Americans working to try to address these challenges that are going to be so impactful in life at this time period. And one of those horrific realities was the existence of lynchings. Lynchings, of course, have been around for a long, long time in the American South. But they have grown in number since the end of slavery. The idea being is that, in this period of time where, whites want to maintain their social dominance, anything that might be perceived as a social slight by someone that is black, particularly young black men, could be grounds for basically kidnapping that person and having a mob hang that person from a tree. This was done, as an extra legal way, so to speak, of imposing proper justice, racial justice in the South. And we saw thousands and thousands of examples of black Americans in the decades after the Civil War ends of being lynched. Everything from, the accusation of, improperly talking to a white woman, or being out past dark in a white section of town. Things like that could be the grounds for white mobs to justify kidnapping and murdering black Americans. And when white local authorities seem to tacitly look the other way, tacitly approve, attention needs to be brought to this. And you're going to be seeing people like, for example Ida Wells here, who will be championing the idea of trying to get legislation passed to ban lynchings and make it a special crime, not just murder, but a special crime, that this was done specifically because of matters of race. This was done specifically to get around the justice system and to bring attention to what is real terrorism that black Americans are facing. And for an African American woman at this time period to be a leading voice in this issue, bringing attention to this issue, is going to be pretty darn historic. Unfortunately, though, you're not going to be seeing any legislation passed to address this issue. And in fact, this is going to probably blow some of your minds here. There still isn't federal anti-lynching legislation in this country, if you can believe that. But the idea of bringing attention to the evils of lynching and not just looking the other way or trying to sweep it under the rug, that's going to be significant. Now, Something else that is also going to have some degree of popularity is what's going to be known as the International Migration Society. For some black Americans, not most, but for some black Americans, there's going to be a push to basically forsake America. That the idea being is that America is too inherently racist. It has embraced Jim Crow segregation laws. You know, despite a civil war, despite the efforts of Reconstruction, whites will never really embrace anything remotely close to racial equality. If that's the case, then some will argue in the black community that the only other alternative then is to go someplace where you're not going to be discriminated against based on your skin color. And the answer to that is what place would that be? Well, that would be Africa. So you are going to be seeing, excuse me, a attempt by some to promote African American immigration to Africa, particularly in Liberia on the west coast of Africa, which has been its own country technically on paper, but really was dominated by expat Americans, almost to the point where it was almost like a quasi-colony kind of a situation over there. And some black Americans will take advantage of it, and in fact will become very powerful and dominant in Liberia. But that's then going to come with some challenges, because many of the black Americans that immigrate to Liberia will oppress the local native Africans in Liberia of the various tribes and ethnicities there. So that's going to create other challenges. But really, if you are a black American, moving to Africa was really not really an option for you, not really entertained that much. So the question then becomes, what do you do if you're black to try to survive, to try to make it in this clearly racist, segregated reality that you live in? And basically what emerges during the late 1800s, early 1900s is basically two schools of thought. And one of those schools of thought comes from this man right here. This is Booker T. Washington. Now, Booker T. Washington is going to be born into slavery, liberated after the Civil War ends, and is going to be a champion of education for black Americans, particularly the idea of education in trade schools. As far as Washington was concerned, was that the reality is that Americans, white Americans who are the dominant group in America, want a racially segregated society. And as far as Washington was concerned, is that that mindset is not really going to be changing anytime soon. So the question then becomes, how can you have equal opportunity in what is going to be, whether you like it or not, a segregated society? And for Washington, it comes through education and it comes through economic success. For Washington, who was going to be, one of the one of the founders of the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama, which is going to be this, really well-renowned trade school, the idea being is that if you can take someone that can get a basic education and then more importantly learn a trade, be it carpentry, plumbing, eventually being an electrician, whatever, welding, you learn a valuable trade. And then what happens is that if you have that skill, people will hire you to work. Even whites will hire you to work if you have a valued skill. And no, you may not get as much money as a white person, but you will make money. And you certainly will make more money than somebody that's, say, a sharecropper. And then if you do that job well and you make money, the argument being is that eventually, as a black man, you could earn enough money, save enough money to then start your own business and then hire other African Americans that are also in the same trade that you're in and build up black America economically from the ground up. The idea being is that, even though there's going to be segregation, even though there's going to be a separation of the races, there is going to be this reality, as far as Booker T. Washington is concerned, that can to some degree overcome this idea of racial superiority, and that's economic success. That one of the things that makes America distinct from other countries historically is that you can break through social, social strata overcome social obstacles that may seem inherently entrenched through economic success. The idea being is that if you are wealthy, people will have to respect you. We don't have born nobility. And we have seen in American history people that have gone from nothing financially to becoming leaders in America because of their accumulation of wealth in their lifetime. Now note, that's been associated with white America, but Booker T. Washington believes that that can be done in black America as well, and you can bridge that gap. So the idea being is that as black Americans gain more financial success, then it will then start to become easier for black Americans to get, for example, more political opportunity, more of a political voice, which would then raise the status of black Americans socially. So it's kind of this idea of if you do well educationally, you make money, you then get more political rights, which then puts you in a status socially where you're going to start to be equal with whites, even though you might be in a segregated society. Now, that is certainly going to be a school of thought that is going to be, for white Americans, much more palatable than what is going to be the alternative. And that's going to be from Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, pictured right here. Du Bois is going to be much more of a political radical, whereas Washington was, more of somebody that was really trying to work within the system, work within the boundaries of the realities of the time. Du Bois, on the other hand, is going to believe that it doesn't matter how much money you may earn as a black man. It will not matter how much education you have. It doesn't matter, what skills you may have technically. If you do not have the rights, the same rights as a white person, you will never be equal in society. You will never be equal socially. You will never be equal economically. You will never have any real equality without the fundamental protection of rights that every American is supposed to enjoy. And that includes, for example, the right to vote, equal protection of the law, etc. That these things are so fundamental that nothing else really matters. And nothing else really can be attained until you have those things truly protected. Now note, this is going to be far less palatable to the typical white American, because what Du Bois is championing is immediate, right now, equality for black Americans politically at a time where white Americans are really not interested in that at all. And so this is going to be seen as a little bit, more radical, more revolutionary, a little bit more dangerous to white America. But, within black America, there's really going to be two schools of thought. How radical do you want to be? How pragmatic you want to be? Du Bois is more revolutionary. He's more radical, although others would argue that he is more principled in terms of here's what's right. Others are going to argue that, Du Bois is going to be, not really living in the bounds of reality, whereas Washington was much more pragmatic, much more realistic in terms of what could be done for black America. So, it is one of those really great debates of, you've got these two political leaders. You've got Washington, you've got Du Bois. They both ultimately want the same thing. They both want black America to have real equality politically, socially, economically. But the question becomes, how do you get there? How do you get that done? So that's going to be important to keep in mind. Both are going to play a critical role. Both are going to be important foundational blocks in what will be the ongoing African American civil rights movements in the 20th century. So, all right. So anyhow, we'll leave it there for today. We'll see you next time.